From WNPR, I'm John Dankosky, and this is The Wheelhouse.
Let me be very clear. I did not collude with Russia, nor do I know of anyone else in the campaign who did so.
Who the hell wants to speak about politics when I'm in front of the Boy Scouts, right?
President Trump's high-profile press secretary, Sean Spicer, resigning in protest, objecting to the president's decision to hire New York financier Anthony Scaramucci as communications director.
Here's what I know about the president. You may not like it, he's got phenomenal instincts. You may not like it, he's got great judgment on people. You may not like it, but he's a phenomenal politician. He started 2 short years ago, and he's already 6 months into his presidency. How many people can do that, Jake?
If he was going to recuse himself, he should have told me prior to taking office, and I would have quite simply picked somebody else.
Mandating legislation from the top down without any support from the other side, with all the parliamentary maneuvers that requires. We're getting nothing done, my friends. We're getting nothing done.
You can join our conversation about the week's news at 860-275-7266. Comment on our website, wnpr.org/The Wheelhouse. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at WNPR Wheelhouse. And on today on Facebook Live, you can find us as well. I'm just going to turn to the camera and wave. You can watch us on Facebook Live. We're also here with the cameras of CTN, the Connecticut Network. So there's a lot of coverage of what we're going to talk about today with Colin McEnroe, host of the Colin McEnroe Show here on WNPR. Hi, Colin.
You know, with all these cameras here, I think I should say I did not collude. In fact, I thought colluding and canoodling were the same thing.
Two different things.
24 hours ago.
Entirely different things. I also want to welcome in Tom Dudchik. He's the editor of CT Capitol Report. Hey, Tom, how's it going?
John, good to be here in regular order.
Yes, in regular order, at least for now. Bill Curry is our political analyst. Hi there, Bill. Good to see you.
Great to be with you, John. Good
morning. So we're going to start with the eventful day on Capitol Hill yesterday. An ailing Senator John McCain flies back to Washington to help open debate on the Republicans' health care bill. Of course, there are several versions of that bill floating around out there. The most comprehensive one got a vote last night. It was soundly defeated. There are, I suppose, 2 other measures to vote on still. It's pretty confusing what is in or out of any of these measures. Tom mentioned regular order. We'll get to that in a moment. John McCain, in his speech that we heard a little bit of, says he wishes for a return to regular order in the Senate, not the type of parliamentary maneuvering that Mitch McConnell's engaged in to bring these unilateral measures to the floor. So of all the things that happened yesterday regarding this health care bill, Colin, what's the thing you're looking most closely at, given the fact that, there's finally an open debate, but now we're not sure if Mitch McConnell has the votes to get any of these things passed?
Right. Well, my read on this, which is worth exactly what I'm charging you for it, is that this may have as much to do with politics and elections as anything else. Big surprise in the Senate. This is sort of an opportunity for a lot of senators to vote essentially yes for something that they may eventually vote no for, or vote yes for something whose failure they may eventually oversee, so that they can, during the election, they can kind of muddy the waters a little bit by saying, well, I did vote yes that day. And McCain, obviously we revere John McCain for a lot of reasons, and we also sympathize with him right now because of his medical condition. I thought in some ways that was kind of an unimpressive speech. It's so much like John McCain to give an impressive and unimpressive speech. I mean, here he is basically decrying the process by which this bill is going to the floor and talking about the fact he couldn't possibly vote for it. And then he goes, well, okay, on 5, hike, let's go. And I mean, really, if it's all that awful, I mean, maybe you should stop. Maybe you should actually listen to your own speech and say, under these circumstances, I cannot possibly vote yes. That would be the logical end of that speech. That's not what we got.
And that really is interesting, Tom. Listening to the speech, you do expect some different sort of outcome at the end of that little movie. But indeed, John McCain votes along with the Republicans, and here we go. We're off to the races on repeal and replace.
Well, and when I was listening to it, I'm kind of waiting for the so what. So I'm listening to it in the car. I get out. I go to the bank. I make a deposit. I come out. He's still speaking. I go to the fruit stand. I get out. He's still speaking. I'm trying to wait for okay, well, what is the deal here? And he just keeps talking about bipartisanship and guys, we didn't do it this way years ago, and I'm as guilty as anybody else. But he tried to evoke this series of bipartisanship to get people to do something, and you just hear people in their offices or in the Senate floor going, yeah, come on, And so I just don't think it fell upon deaf ears. It's like when the congressman got shot and everyone decried gun violence. Let's get together again. That didn't bring it together.
Well, and nothing really brings it together anymore in Washington. I suppose, Bill, before we get to the substance of some of what they were talking about, you have often been on this program talking about bipartisanship, right? This is something that John McCain talks an awful lot about, that if we just all worked across party lines, we would end up with a much better America. You've always been dubious of this idea, at least in the way that it's expressed there.
Yeah, let me put on, I'd like to come back to McCain for 1 second, but after this, but in response to your question. First of all, people should take note that the positions of the Democratic leadership and Mitch McConnell on Plan B, or whatever letter they're at now, are the same. Both sides want to increase the subsidies of the so-called individual marketplace. And that is the only thing. Neither side is committed to doing that. But when each side is asked to give an example of where bipartisanship may lie, that's the example they give. More money to the insurance companies to cover the shortfall. And I would say that, yes, one, we've had a bipartisan consensus at the top in Washington since for as long as I can remember. There's a myth of partisan conflict. When it comes to the Iraq war or unregulated global trade or deficits or pay-to-play politics or no child left behind or the welfare bill, the crime bill, all of the great catastrophes of my lifetime were bipartisan achievements. And it's no surprise that Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell are agreed upon a so-called bailout of Obamacare, which just gives the insurers more money. And so what they really need to do, and then let me just take the Democrats and McCain. The Democrats need to put on the table what their position is, what they want. Put a blueprint on the table. It begins, as I wrote in Salon 2 weeks ago, with something I proposed in Connecticut way back when I was the comptroller. You need a robust public option. That means self-funded and self-administered. It needs to be open to the small businesses and self-employed who are the victims of the worst price gouging. And as for John McCain, you know, I've said this before in the show. I was very privileged to spend some time with John McCain in my life, and I kept bumping into him when he was doing wonderful things. I had the portfolio for tobacco when I worked for Clinton and did some work on it afterward, and McCain was the hero. I had campaign finance reform, and twice I brought McCain in to meet with Clinton just to give Clinton some spine on the issue because McCain was so good. Mostly I worked with him on normalization of Vietnam. He spent 5.5 years in the Hanoi Hilton and then was the single American who did the most to normalize relations between the two countries. I once stood in the cell in which he spent those 5 years. You can't stand there and not shed a tear. Having said that, like Colin, I've been disappointed in some of these last few years, but this is a defining moment. The commentators on cable television have said he might unify the Republicans. Not a chance. They don't even like him that much. He might go for bipartisanship. Unlikely that he can lead that, and this isn't an area in which he's particularly skilled in policy. What he can do is go back to the maverick that made him, being the maverick in the way that made his career, and stand up against the excesses of his own party, and that may then lead to, if not real reform, at least a real discussion.
What would have been nice to hear from him yesterday was, I mean, it was so much about Senate procedure. He's very much a creature of the Senate. They all turn into that. Would have been nice to hear more about, wow, I'm in this health crisis right now, and I try to put myself in the position of people who don't have gold-plated U.S. Senate health care. You know, what do they go through? I know what I'm going through. It's so hard. I put myself in the position of these other people. I mean, that's one of the things that's absent here. I'll just quickly say, I don't know what they're going to do. They don't know what they're going to do. One option for them is the so-called skinny repeal of Obamacare, which is basically knock out the mandates and maybe one or two other things. And then probably you get what Trump wants, which is that Obamacare dies this writhing death in public. I would assume if you knock out the mandates, the insurance companies start backing away. One thing to remember is there's going to be a ripple effect to anything that they do. And if you're sitting there thinking, well, I've got policy X, so I'm probably okay, you might be wrong about that. I mean, for example, here in Connecticut, 86% of the people get their health insurance through their jobs. But those kinds of policies would be probably affected long term if, in fact, a lot of people become uninsured. Because when that happens, hospitals and other providers have to kind of jack up their prices to the insured patients in order to make things, which means the insurance companies jack up their rates or employers start offering more stripped down insurance plans. So don't imagine for a second that anybody's safe here, because in fact, once this process starts, a lot of dominoes follow.
Yeah, and I heard the ubiquitous Chris Murphy on a multitude of morning shows this morning.
Doing Seth Meyers this week.
He's planning on doing that, but there may be some votes in the Senate that he's rolling out 100 amendments, and I don't know when he's going to start that. But even he said this morning, he goes, he thinks they're going to roll out a bunch of bills. And they're all going to basically be test bills. And they're going to run Rand Paul's bill out, and then keep running them out, and they're going to vote them all down, and then finally get to throw their hands up in the air, as Colin says, and do nothing and declare victory.
Well, so it's declaring victory, Tom. But I mean, so you have not just in Connecticut certainly, but across America, an awful lot of people who voted for Donald Trump, who voted for change, who when asked a couple of years ago, "What do you think of Obamacare?" They say it's an abomination. It's the worst thing in the world. Of course, an awful lot of these people get their health insurance in some way, shape, or form through some provisions of Obamacare or through Medicaid. I mean, I guess. Well, I guess I'm wondering if Republicans, not just in the Senate, as Colin said earlier, are sort of wondering about what exactly do we do with this? We might win, we might get something done. Boy, if we get something done, an awful lot of people are going to be super unhappy with us in 2018.
Yeah, and I think the CBO score that everyone is just trying to run away from basically was 15 to 25 million will be uninsured, and there's a lot of those in Trump country. And so when the chickens come home to roost, they're going to go, well, what do you mean I have no health care? And they'll say, well, you didn't want it.
Well, you said before, Bill, I mean, the Democrats need to put something on the table. I mean, what's exactly the thing that's on the table? When you put Democrats to the test and say, okay, what are the problems with Obamacare as written? No one that I think holds elected office right now stands up and says the things that you've said about it. I mean, what could they put on the table that actually is going to make sense?
First of all, there are a bunch of senators who have endorsed a single-payer bill. None of them are from Connecticut, but there are a bunch who've done that, senators and congressmen. And yes, I do think that in all likelihood that's the optimum system, and the Democrats pay no political price for having the courage to come out and say for it. I've learned recently that a number of Senate leaders have been telling people they'd like to be more clear about this, but they're afraid of the backlash in states like Missouri and West Virginia where they're swing senators. And it's like, the backlash is on cultural issues in those states. There's no backlash for taking care of people's health care in West Virginia. There's no backlash. It's a fundamental misconstruction of their political position. As for my own opinion, what is politically feasible, and if you look at the experiences in Vermont and California, economically, fiscally, practically feasible is to open with a public option. If you had a real public option, you let nonprofits, municipalities, state employees, small business, self-employed, all into one system. With Medicare and Medicaid, that would be 2/3 of the American people under basically a public option, what is the equivalent of a single-payer plan. It would work so well that everyone else in the country would be beating down the doors to get into it. But you'd have a transition that you could manage and in a position you can explain. This was what Obama ran on in 2008 and won. He ran on no mandate and a public option, and instead did a mandate and no public option, the opposite. If the Democrats are simply to reverse field and go with what they won on in 2008, they'd have a chance to implement real change.
Were this a normal year in politics, this would be the thing that was drawing the most attention in Washington. But instead, there's an ongoing investigation into Russia and whether or not there's collusion between the Trump campaign and the Trump White House and Russia, and Donald Trump attacking in part his attorney general, not just calling for his weakness on Russia in that he's recused himself because he had some dealings with Russia while part of the Trump campaign, but also his weakness on not going after Hillary Clinton. Yeah, he's still tweeting and talking about Hillary Clinton.
After having said going in that he was taking that whole thing off the table, I do think the Sessions thing, I mean, first of all, I wouldn't miss Jeff Sessions if he were gone. I can't believe that we'll get a worse attorney general. I also don't think we'll get a better one, but I never thought he was a particularly good choice. I think what this is more of a placeholder for is, the president acting increasingly mad. I mean, it's almost impossible to construct the argument that's in his head right now from any logical materials. Like, why? Why, of all things to be doing right now, would you be compromising and undercutting your attorney general? It's hard even to construct a pretty good cynical argument for why he would be doing that. It just seems insane. I mean, I don't know if we're going to get to the hot mic issue where Susan Collins and Jack Reed were starting to talk about how crazy this guy is getting, and this is spreading too. I mean, the Boy Scout speech, which you heard a clip from there, it was alarming to a number of people. I think it was especially upsetting to Rex Tillerson, another member of the cabinet, to whom the Boy Scouts are more important than probably anything except his family. And there's a lot of talk now of a Rexit, that maybe Tillerson won't be around. He actually says something like, "I need a few days away from all this," or something.
Kind of like a mental health day.
Like when the other person in your relationship goes, "I just need a little time away." Okay, so I mean, I think you're seeing a ripple effect also there. That there is increasingly this sense that not that you can sort of identify a certain behavior or idea of the president's and object to it, but that you can no longer construct a logical undergirding for the stuff that he does.
And when you look at even Breitbart and the alt-right movement are coming to Sessions' defense, they understand that this guy is wildly popular among the base. And so there's a lot of flares going up to the Trump White House saying, you got to back off this guy, but how's that working?
Well, Newt Gingrich this morning on NPR was defending Jeff Sessions. And that's, I think, one of the strange things, Bill, is, as Colin suggests, and Tom just did, an awful lot of the people who got Donald Trump elected were the type of people who were really, really hoping for a Jeff Sessions as Attorney General. Like the good get for them is not necessarily a president who's figuring it out.
It was Sessions, not Trump.
It was Sessions and not Trump. And now you're going to throw the guy that they wanted under the bus. I guess I'm just wondering how long any of this craziness can last. But then also, I don't know, it's been crazy since the start. I'm not exactly sure why we would think that it's going to start getting different now.
I pointed out in a recent show here, actually, that if you look at the Watergate timeline, where we are right now is right about where Nixon beat McGovern by a near-record landslide, and an even larger majority of Republicans were all for him. The country was barely covering the story. This thing has moved faster than almost any precedent you can look at in American history. And the time doesn't really come until the people who are executing the law begin to indict and begin to put a bill of particulars out. And at that point, we will know whether that 40% constant base that Trump has been able to maintain throughout all of this, when in fact a former FBI director and federal prosecutor lists an indictment, which is going to happen, we'll know. I just want to say one other thing, and that is that I'm just stunned. I was stunned listening to the Gingrich interview this morning, that Gingrich can say it's been proven there's no crime. And the host, I wish, had said, actually, this is primarily an investigation of the corruption of the American democracy by foreign power, and we have more evidence that there's a crime than you ever need to prove probable cause and bring an indictment. We're way past that. And if you're arguing that you have to prove the case before you bring the case, well, we all know that's not true. And they keep doing things. And we keep not being able to fight. When people, prior to Trump, Newt Gingrich was the most dishonest person in American public life. He lost the crown. And when you have people coming in to respected traditional journalists, politicians, institutions across this country that have been the bulwark of the democracy, intent on lying and defaming, bringing problems like corruption and fraud and mental illness, we are unequipped to deal with them. We don't have traditions and protocols that make it easy for us to respond. And you see this in the history of authoritarian governments taking over liberal democracies over the last century. And so it's a discussion we've begun in this country, but we really have to accelerate. How, in fact, when a lie is being told, what are you going to do about it? And what do you have to be, as journalists and as politicians, to be prepared to respond in real time?
And I think there's this notion of the normalization of craziness. So it's like if Bill Curry's running for controller, and so I think you should throw your
That's
hat.
your example
throw
of
your,
craziness?
No, you're running for controller, and someone comes to me and
Tom,
says,
you're killing
we
me.
have some terrible information on Bill Curry. Well, I take the meeting. Now, if the Russians come to me and say, we got something
But if
bad,
Boris and Natasha
That's right.
come and
They showed up,
say,
with
herd courier, we kill
right,
squirrel,
exactly.
you say
Then we
no.
say, well, hey, so we draw
You
a
do
line.
say no,
You say
right?
no.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
well,
good boy.
I say no.
I met with a
Well,
lot of
that's why
Russians
I love this guy.
I met with a lot of those Russians about Bill. They never had anything good.
The problem is it's a normalization of craziness where everyone's going, well, I mean, it's like George Costanza. Was there anything wrong with that? I mean, should I not have done that? I mean, it's like crazy.
Well, I think, and the next level of this, of course, Colin, is we get the statement, public statement, private testimony of Jared Kushner. Paul Manafort now supposed to privately speak to investigators as the Senate has dropped a subpoena for him to appear publicly. Here are some folks who know even a little bit more clearly. Jared Kushner goes out in front and says, boy, I've not really done this before. I don't really know exactly what I'm doing. Paul Manafort, I think we can all clearly say, knows a little bit about contact with Russians in the past. And I don't know, is this all being normalized as well?
I think, I don't know about normalized, but there's sort of a drinking from the fire hose problem where there's so much happening that people are having trouble absorbing or focusing on any one thing. I will say that, and I think Kushner's statement and his 11-page report this week would be an example of that. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there, but it was just like it flew by. I mean, this is the first time that most of us, I think, have heard Jared Kushner's voice. If you think about it, he really has been very much behind the scenes. I'm sure 30%.
Got that whole Minnie Mouse thing going.
Right.
Yeah.
It's got like 30% of Americans probably think he's the subway guy.
Yeah.
But what he's talking about there is really interesting. And I think somebody just alluded to part of it, which is that he says essentially what we've all been thinking, which is that he doesn't really know very much about this stuff. This guy's been placed in charge of essentially dealing with ISIS, Middle East peace in the Middle East, and
reorganizing the federal government.
Yeah, reinventing government. So this is a guy.
Trade.
He's 36. Ivanka's 35. They have no government experience. They've been handed a tremendous portfolio of stuff to do. And one of his essential defenses to, I think we can agree, at minimum, letting Russia into the Trump campaign. In other words, Russia got access to the Trump campaign. There's no question about that. We could talk about whether there's colluding or not, but access, definitely, and he was a big point of access. His big defense is, well, I just don't know that much about stuff like this. His description of his behavior during the summer Trump Tower meeting is hilarious. I mean, as we all know, he said he didn't read all the way to the bottom of the email, although, as Bill likes to point out, it's at the top of the email, there's a subject line that says what it's about. And now he says he was so bored that he had an assistant. He texted an assistant to call him out of the meeting.
Raise your hand if no one's ever done that.
Yeah, that's right.
And then he basically, and then he tries to set up a back channel through the Russian embassy to Russia.
Yeah, that didn't look suspicious. But here's the, but again, we have to have a debate here in the country in which we get in which we have better informed people in both the political parties and in the press discussing these issues. Collusion. You don't have to, I said with Colin the other day, if you break into the bank and shoot the guard and blow open the vault, if there's no money in it, you're still going to jail. And collusion is itself attempt. The question of collusion has been proven. They were colluding that day. Someone sent an email. If someone had said a week before it happened, hey, what if they got an email that said the Russian government wants to give you some dirt it dug up on Hillary? Can you get all your top brass to that meeting and we'll send a couple thugs? We would all have agreed that was collusion, whether the information was useful or not.
I just have to.
That's
just
what collusion means.
But I'm just wondering if the word itself is part of the problem.
Yes.
Because the word collusion suggests that the Trump administration is colluding with the Russian administration to do something that is against the interests of America. And I think that what seems to be laid out here is, and maybe it's during the campaign, is something that looks an awful lot like what Tom just talked about, which goes on in politics all the time. People want to continually look up dirt on somebody else, and they'll go to some great lengths to get it. Republicans do it. Democrats do it. That is something I fear that has been completely normalized in American
politics. But people take campaign contributions all the time, but if they take them from a foreign power, it's a felony. They do opposition research all the time, but if they get it from a foreign power, it's a felony. And I've said for a while now that people should say conspire rather than collude because people know what conspire means. And it doesn't have to be a conspiracy against the American interest in some identifiable program. People keep saying there has to be a quid pro quo. The quid pro quo is that they get their guy as president. There's nothing else you need. And so all these things, presidential pardon, the idea that he has an absolute pardon, if you turn on CNN, you hear both sides, and it's hard to sort out. If he has an absolute if he has an absolute right to pardon, there is no criminal justice system for any criminal enterprise with which he's associated. It can't be true.
Tom, and then Colin real quick.
The there is that Kirshner was running their digital operation. He knew where they were putting their digital assets, and they know someone had to tell the Russians where to put their bots and their fake news. And so there's the tie-in. I mean, he was in charge of what he called his brilliant digital strategy in these states to micro-target to the cell phone level these people. Well, someone had to target those messages to those cell phones, and so there you have it.
And so McClatchy has been reporting that particular version of the story. Well, I mean, just to put a bow on all this, maybe. I mean, a lot of what we're talking about here is probably essentially the same thing. This takes us all the way back to the Sessions question. Ultimately, they know they have a problem. Trump knows he's got a problem, and one of the things he's been asking is, who can save me? Who can get me out of this? And one of the things he's being told was, well, not your attorney general, because he's recused from this process, hence the temper tantrum. Well, can I pardon everybody, including myself? I mean, they are at that stage, and the ultimate person who's going to decide what collusion means is Robert Mueller, if they don't fire Robert Mueller, which I think we all agree is probably a better than 50% chance right now that he will fire Mueller before that process concludes. At which point they have to game that out, too. And we have to game that out, too. What happens when the president tries to fire Robert Mueller?
Well, and I think, but maybe, Colin, we saw a bit of it yesterday, is that when the president fires Robert Mueller, John McCain stands up and makes a speech very much like the speech he made yesterday, but then doesn't necessarily do anything about it. I mean, the pattern, I think, with many Republicans in Washington has been to sit back and watch. Is that the red line? Is the red line getting involved in the investigation into collusion with Russia?
I think that Trump has hurt himself. Oh, let me just go back to McCain's speech. McCain's speech was about how things are done in Washington, how the Senate operates, which is something everybody in Washington is really interested in, more interested in often than they are in matters of substance. So this kind of creeps into that area. They know Jeff Sessions. They like Jeff Sessions. They don't like the way Jeff Sessions is being treated right now. Similarly, Mueller has a certain kind of profile. I actually think that they will probably, some of them will have to do something. If he fires Mueller, it's such a violation of the process. And they know a lot about process there.
You know, one of the up to this point in Washington, whenever you hear the words witch hunt, it's part of a three-word phrase: partisan witch hunt. And this, you notice you only hear witch hunt. You never hear partisan witch hunt, because everyone in charge of the witch hunt is a Republican or even a direct appointee of the president himself. It's his attorney general. Comey was a Bush Republican who contributed to campaigns, Republican campaigns. Mueller has been a Republican, never a Democrat. These are Republican committees, chaired committees that are running all of this. And it's disheartening for Democrats. But in fact, it's going to have to be Republicans who make that decision. I'm less disheartened by John McCain letting the process go through. I can understand he would give his leader that chance. But in these next few days, he'll have to stand up. No Republican has stood up in any meaningful way so far in this investigation. If it comes to a threat on Mueller, that will be the acid test for them.
We're talking with Bill Curry, our political analyst, Tom Dudchik from CT Capitol Report, Colin McEnroe from The Colin McEnroe Show. When we come back, we're going to turn our focus to some state issues, find out once again if anything is happening with the state budget in Hartford. This is The Wheelhouse. This is The Wheelhouse. I'm John Dankosky. We're talking about the week's news with Bill Curry, our political analyst, and also Tom Dudchik, editor of CT Capitol Report, Colin McEnroe, host of The Colin McEnroe Show on WNPR. What's on your show today, Colin?
Today, this will be a nice break from what we're talking about right now. We're talking about a 60-year Russian experiment on the domestication of foxes. But there's a lot that can come out of that in terms of how we learn about humans interacting with the animal world. Let me just quickly also say, tomorrow...
You know, you are some kind of a nut, really.
No, this is actually...
Today's show is a 60-year Russian experiment on
domestication of foxes.
Domestication of foxes.
Yeah.
Can you just give us how's it going?
It's going, well, no, I don't want to give it away. Okay. Too many spoilers. This is done by our fabulous intern, Carmen Baskov, who unfortunately has a fox-born illness now and is probably going to turn into a fox. But, that happens. I just want to quickly say tomorrow,
Yes.
more germane to this, we decided to, we've done a lot of shows, particularly on Mondays, about the Trump administration, about the sort of so-called Trump era. We decided we would go back and talk to some of the people that we've talked to along the way, starting with the Iranian writer Azar Nafisi, who was on the day after the election. This is somebody who lived through the Khomeini revolution, whose family had major consequences from that. So Azar's coming back with us. Sarah Kendzior, probably one of the more dark leftist writers about the Trump administration. Henry Alford, the humorist and manners expert, and Margaret Sullivan from the Washington Post.
That's a great
Dark
show.
leftist, isn't that oxymoron?
Well, no, Sarah takes it one step further.
Good point, Tom.
So that's coming up on the Colin McEnroe Show. And quickly, Tom Dudchik, you had a program, CT Capitol Report Roundtable program, taking a look at the week's news that was on television for a couple of years. It went away, but it's back again. Can you tell us about
Yes,
it?
we are back on Sunday mornings on WTNH 8 New Haven at 10 o'clock, right after Stephanopoulos. And we have a great panel. Jen Schneider, who's the communication director for 1199, she kind of anchors the left of the table. Roy Occhio Grosso, kind of the middle left. Joey Latina, who's chief of staff for Mayor Aaron Stewart. And then Chris Healy, the big dog. So just seeing Healy and Occhio Grosso go after each other is worth the price of admission every Sunday morning.
Is this something you did with the McMahons? Yeah, it's just a little.
It is. I mean,
are people going to wear costumes?
no. If you think it's
Or
tough
are they
to
just
get,
gonna come in
if
regular
you think it's tough
cities?
to break into Curry when he's on a roll, try getting Healy and Roy to break it up to go into commercial.
So let's turn quickly to what's happening at the state level. And congratulations, Tom, on your new program.
Thank you, John.
The House of Representatives on Monday narrowly approved the state employees concession deal, expected to save about $1.5 billion this fiscal year and the next combined. The Democrat-controlled House voted 78 to 72, almost entirely along party lines. Here's Themis Claridis, who is the minority leader in the House on this.
That CBAC agreement is detrimental to the state of Connecticut and, quite frankly, detrimental to the state employee. Because whether you are a state employee or not, you are still a citizen and a taxpayer of the state of Connecticut. And when we have no money to move the state forward, we have a $5 billion deficit, when we have made no structural changes, we are looking at tax increases from the other side of the aisle. That is no way to move the state of Connecticut forward, and this agreement will have dire consequences for the state and the taxpayer.
Okay, so that's Themis Claridis responding to the CBAC vote. Governor Dan Malloy's response includes the words, "She's ridiculous." So I don't know, Colin, where this gets us in our conversation about state employees.
That really.
And knows what not she speaks, he said.
Right. Well, I mean, I think, I don't know. This is why while Tom's show is on the air, I'm in church every Sunday praying. I guess one way to frame this is that we could certainly argue that the CBAC agreement, which is what I don't know if people could hear the audio, but that's what she's decrying. We could say that it's flawed. It is flawed. And we could also agree with the Republicans that the process by which we arrive at these agreements is probably flawed. We are one of 4 states in the United States that does this through collective bargaining as opposed to legislation. We could agree about that. The problem is you've got this collapsed budget right now. You've got a budget and a state government and a bunch of other satellite organizations that are connected to the state government that provide services to the most vulnerable populations. And you've got a whole bunch of cities and towns, and it's all just lying down on the sand like a Lawrence of Arabia camel that just kind of collapsed. And you've got to get the camel back up and walking. You have to do that because of all these vulnerable populations and the nonprofits that take care of them. You got to get the camel up and walking. And right now, your only chance to do that is with this particular set of labor concessions. They may not be everything that we want, and they may not be a permanent fix. In fact, I can practically guarantee you they're not a permanent fix. But we got to get the camel back up and walking, and this is if in fact this thing gets thrown out. And there, I know Tom's ready to say there could be a very, very close vote in the Senate on this. There's, as usual, Joan Hartley is a possible defector from the Democrats. But if you don't get the camel back up and walking, it's going to be bad. It's going to be terrible, and it might be months before we get to a budget again.
Well, I have another animal analogy, and since I my job is to repurpose other people's works on my site as links. My friend Mark Pazniokos, I have to give him credit for it. Here's the difference between when Curry was during the Weicker administration in the '90s versus today's budget thing. Pazniokos says incorrectly, back then we knew where the whale was. Right? All we had to do was harpoon it and get it on the boat, which meant we had to convince a bunch of legislators to vote for an income tax. But we knew the solution. Today, we don't know where the whale is. And so we're still looking for the whale. And so until we can identify the whale, and that either a mix of taxes and spending cuts, this is going to go on for a long time because the whale is still being hunted, Bill Curry.
You know, first of all, I savor the irony that we're spending the morning discussing two failed states, Russia and Connecticut, and
Curry for comptroller.
And I agree. And you're the best. And I agree that we don't know where the whale is now, and I have spent a disproportionate amount of my time in my adult life looking at the state budget, and it's never been anything like this. It is beyond anything that I ever dealt with in public office. Having said that, most of what I hear from Themis, with all respect to Themis, about systemic reform is other ideological stuff that they want to do. They want to get rid of collective bargaining. They want to continue a war with an ancient war of theirs with the state employees. There's a lot of concessions here. The original stint of the Malloy administration was not getting the concessions he was supposed to get in his first budget, and the state has lived that out since forever. I'll just make two collateral remarks about this. One is, whoever's running for office right now, governor on down, should this is the year to run on a platform of no promises. This is the year to admit that most of the things you want a government to do are going to take a while, and that you're going to focus on fixing the extraordinary managerial and, above all, ethical problems and policy problems that beset this state. And you're going to fix the things. I've often said here, you can either change the rule or write the check. There are lots of things we can put into place. But this is the time to be really honest about how long it's going to take to fix what's wrong here, and the second thing is that as these guys go forward into this next campaign, I don't see any kind of a debate, and that's because the problems here for the Democratic Party are with its own base. It has to have a discussion, as with the national situation. It has to have a discussion with its base about what is possible here and what isn't, and it has to be a frank and full discussion that just never has.
But what does that discussion look like? I mean, isn't part of that discussion with state employees?
Yeah, let me just say, I actually, there's a point at which you have to take everybody who is unhappy with state employees, and I've criticized probably as much as any Democrat the deals that were made earlier. At the same time, I don't want to drive down wages, and public employees have actually been a floor for wages in this state. We haven't had a real, we've lost lots of other floors. It's the last one. When they lose their defined benefit pensions, and when they are finally driven down further than they have been, I don't, if you're a Democratic economic theorist, it's not going to add to demand in this state. And so one of the things to have that kind of debate is, everybody should say out loud, what's the number? What's the number they're supposed to live on? Come out and have an actual explanation. By the way, where people are overpaid is at the top. Where people are overpaid is at the university system. Where the people are overpaid are among political appointees. It's the people at the top. When people actually find out what the median pension is, what the median income is, I hardly ever meet anybody who has any problem with it. They then have to fix health care. They then have to fix ethics. They then have to do land use planning. The last thing I'll say is this: is that this state, the one thing that the Malloy crowd can say is, hey, we didn't blow up the whole restaurant, just the bar. Okay, the state of Connecticut is actually still a pretty good place with a lot of resources. It's just the government that's badly broken. It's the government that has to be fixed, and Democrats have trouble. Just like Republicans have trouble saying government should do something, Democrats have trouble ever saying it really is broken.
I like the restaurant and bar metaphor. It was supposed to have been an animal metaphor for the segment, and so you're docked 1 point.
I guess we're short on time here. Though I guess the one thing that I would say is I don't think that you'll hear anybody run in 2018 for governor saying the stuff about state employees that Bill just said. Whether that stuff is correct or not, I just don't think it's. I don't think it flies politically. And I think whoever is going to run whoever's going to run successfully is going to try to run as an outsider. And I don't really know who can really plausibly do that. We were thinking about talking about the Paz's article about Tim Herbst this week, sort of see that he's trying to maybe format himself that way. I don't really think that person is in the field yet, the person who can plausibly run as an outsider, but I think that that's probably going to be a pretty powerful idea.
Real quick, Tom.
But when you look at outsiders, I mean, everyone's tried to run as an outsider, from Linda McMahon to Tom Foley, and there's an interesting quirk in the electorate that they believe the profession of a politician, they know how to do things, like we know about budgets and doing this and doing that, and so they tend to elect politicians because that's their job. It's like
I think that particular belief may be under assault right now.
Well, with Donald Trump,
that like at the state capitol, that they know how to do things.
Well, yeah, exactly. So, but I think that's a nice saw to fall back on. But I just think that people elect politicians, and a lot of the business guys don't want to get in the race.
Is there anybody interesting? I mean, you right now your site is populated with a lot of stories about people who are deciding to get into the race, maybe thinking about getting in the race. Anything interesting out there in terms of the?
I heard a rumor Chris Dodd is making some rumblings out there, and also I heard the current commissioner of Veteran Affairs, I think Sean Connolly, is looking at a run as well. So I think this the race is not set yet.
A last very quick thought, Bill.
I want to just respond to what Colin said, and that is. I'm not saying that no one in the public sector has to continue to make sacrifices. I am saying that when you break the numbers down, it's shocking how much the sacrifice should come from the top. The state government isn't much unlike the rest of the economy in that way. And if you're looking at salaries, wages, and living standards, you start by looking at the top. That's where the inequality has grown in the public sector just as it has in the private sector.
We got a tweet during our last conversation from AFT. Hashtag CT state workers agreed to $24 billion to save vital public services over the next 20 years. Good for taxpayers, good for whales and camels. We're going to take a break, and we're going to come back with Bill Curry, with Tom Dudzik from CT Capitol Report, and our own Colin McEnroe, and talk about another story that sort of got buried amongst everything else, something that Richard Blumenthal has signed on to that the ACLU is not too excited about. That's next, Where We Live. This is The Wheelhouse. I'm John Dankosky. We're talking about the week's news with Colin McEnroe, with Tom Dudzik from CT Capitol Report, and Bill Curry, our political analyst. You can also watch along on CTN, the Connecticut Network. And today we're also on Facebook Live at The Wheelhouse and also at WNPR. There's a betting line open for when Bill's headphones will fall off for a third time. I'm thinking it's about...
so cold.
Well,
the listeners didn't know anything about this.
This is why television is good.
Anything, well, he probably wasn't looking at me then.
I want to talk about two stories. One that came up this morning very, very quickly. Here's a Donald Trump tweet. Ready? After consultation with my generals and military experts, please be advised that the United States government will not accept or allow transgender individuals to serve in any capacity in the U.S. military. Our military must be focused on decisive and overwhelming victory and cannot be burdened with the tremendous medical costs and disruption that transgender in the military would entail. Thank you. So that's brand new from Donald Trump this morning, Colin.
Well, in, I guess, the contravention of the overall Donald Trump approach to things, I don't want to talk about this until I know more about it. If you want me to spitball a little bit, I would say he's looking for distractions. He's looking for other things to talk about. This probably is something that he did run by a few military leaders, kind of probably in the tone of, hey, you guys would be okay with that, right? You don't want any transgender people, do you? And probably most military leaders went, yeah, that'd be okay. Now, these things usually take some form of review. I don't know enough about the existence of the way this policy would be framed to know what kind of review it would have to go through. If you think back to Don't Ask, Don't Tell in 1993, that took a little doing. It wasn't something that you could just do by imperial fiat. So I don't know it seems to me like he just wants to change the subject.
Jim Himes was quick to retweet the Donald this morning, saying from a Trump tweet a year ago, "Thank you to the LGBT community. I will fight for you while Hillary brings in more people that will threaten your freedoms and beliefs." Love and kisses, Donald Trump.
Well, I guess I'm just wondering, Bill. Colin said, "Why does this come out now? A distraction?" Maybe he was just taking a look at the news this morning. The latest bathroom bill has passed through the Senate in the state of Texas and now moves to the House. A lot of people in the business community there are upset, but of course it's something that has a lot of resonance within Trump country. I don't know, maybe he's just pulling out things from the news today and deciding, oh yeah, we don't like transgender people. That's where I'm going to go today.
You know, I think Bob Mueller is on the verge of exposing a vast criminal enterprise. That is certainly more the facts on the table say that's more likely than not. Our healthcare system is within 1 or 2 votes of being destroyed. No one noticed this week, or few people noticed, but in Greenland, an area 7 times the size of the United Kingdom, an ice 2 miles thick, is accelerating vastly more than we thought. It could add 20 feet to the to sea levels and destroy every civilization based on coastal enterprise, which is every civilization. And the Texas legislature and Donald Trump are tweeting LGBT oppressive rhetoric in order to inflame bigots. I am so sorry for my country. For a long time now, I've been debating with my friend John Berman, attorney in South Windsor, my lifelong friend John, as to whether Trump is an evil genius or just plain nuts. And I'm in the second group. I think he lacks impulse control. More than any adult I've ever met, let alone in politics. I don't know why he did it this morning. He may have thought it was a good distraction. He may not have been able to help himself. We just don't know anymore.
Well, okay, so let's turn to something that was, I guess, a little bit more considered. Reading here from The Intercept, the lead author of the controversial Israel Anti-Boycott Act, Democratic Senator Ben Cardin from Maryland, is open to amending the legislation to address concerns raised by the American Civil Liberties Union. That's according to a report in The Intercept. Some of the text of the bill bans actions which have the effect of furthering or supporting restrictive trade practices or boycotts fostered or imposed by any international government organization against Israel, or requests to impose restrictive trade practices or boycotts by any international governmental organization against Israel. And this is something that our Senator Richard Blumenthal signed on to as a co-sponsor, Colin. It's a little unclear that all the senators know exactly what this bill would do.
Among the House co-sponsors are Joe Courtney and John Larson as well. So this is an odd thing where I think by Saturday afternoon, Bill and I had reached out to each other by phone. It turns out probably right almost at exactly the same time in the morning. We were reading about this going, WTF! So this, at least on the face of it, does look like a bill that would, maybe you could say, further criminalize dissent in the form of boycotts of Israel, specifically that have something to do with policies of the EU and the UN. So that's what freaked the ACLU out. I think, the short version of this, which we need because we're almost out of time, is the bill is so poorly written and so poorly worded. A lot of the people who are on it don't know what it says. It's very possible that nobody knows what it says because it's such a mess. But it's certainly the kind of pushback that they've gotten, starting with the ACLU and Glenn Greenwald's Intercept, has at least forced them back to the drafting table. They're going to have to rewrite this thing.
Bill?
You know, I'd say, first of all, I saw Ben Cardin's, I read Ben Cardin's letter. I think you sent it to me, Colin, and it's a lie. I guess we're moving to an era in which you have to use the word lie more. But here's the official summary of the bill from on the House side, same language. The bill prohibits U.S. persons engaged in interstate or foreign commerce. That's all of us, by the way, according to civil rights bills and lots of other definitions. From requesting the imposition of any boycott by a foreign country against a country, any boycott fostered or imposed by any international organization. That's the UN boycott. This is in utter and complete contemptuous violation of the First Amendment of the United States. And saying, as Cardin does, that there's some ambiguities in the language or we didn't really know, it simply doesn't wash. He should stop saying that. He should meet with the ACLU. And if there's any reason to pass any part of this, he should focus on that. But this truly is, I'm just shocked. I'm just shocked to see something like this so easily gain steam. A majority of members of Congress have already co-sponsored it.
Maybe just to give a hard example is the way I understand this bill. Let's say your local health food store read about UN engendered boycott of Israel and said, "We're going to do that too. We're not going to bring in any lemons or whatever." They would be criminally punishable by fine or maybe imprisonment under a bill like this for like agreeing with the UN about something like that. I mean, no.
Let me say that's not the language in the bill. The language in the bill, I promise you, says that any person engaged in commerce, whether they have that shop or not, who says that anybody else should. That's any person in interstate commerce. You're a plumber, and you say that you're for this boycott. I'm not arguing for the boycott here, by the way. I'm arguing a free speech question. And if there weren't 1,000 examples of attacks on democracy and the rule of law in this country in the last 6 months, I probably wouldn't be so worked up about it. But now every one of them just absolutely inflames me. And the idea that this is a Congress in which a majority could sign on to a bill that has that explicit language in it that I just read, and the penalty, by the way, up to 20 years in prison and a $250,000 fine.
But
wow.
I guess I'll just ask Tom, though, given some of the other things we've talked about earlier with health care, is this an indictment of the crafters of the bill, which Bill clearly seems to be doing? Is it an indictment of a whole bunch of people who are signing on and literally don't know what the legislation is and are signing on to something that sounds like a good idea but might put people in jail for 20 years?
First of all, after Curry's monologue about the ice shelf off Greenland, I'm pretty depressed right now. But I
tell you, nobody like me for bringing a room down. Go ahead.
Well, but I think you're right, Sean. I think a lot of people sign on to the bill and have no idea what's in it.
And I think that
I'm shocked to find that goes
happens?
on. Yes.
Wow.
That actually happens. Tom Dudchik is the editor of CT Capitol Report. You can now see him again on television on Sunday mornings. Tom, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, John.
Thanks to Bill Curry, our Democratic political analyst. Thank you so much, Bill.
Thank you, sir.
And thanks to Colin McEnroe, host of the Colin McEnroe Show, the Foxy Colin McEnroe. Thanks so much, Colin.
Fox Domestication. Remember, an intern gave up her life as a human being for this show.
Thanks to Heather Brandon, Kyone Wolf, and Katie Tolarski for producing The Wheelhouse. I'm John Dankowski.